Welcome back to What If History, where we venture into worlds that could have been, but thankfully weren't, or maybe they should have been. I'm your host, Colin Holmes, and today we're exploring a timeline where witch hunts never happened. No mass hysteria, no pyres burning in the night. Just a world where humanity skips over some of its most shameful moments. So what does that world look like? Buckle up, because we're diving into the unexpected consequences of a history where witches lived to tell the tale. What if the witch hunts had never happened? Alright, let's set the stage. It's Europe in the 17th century, but instead of pitchforks and torches, the locals are, maybe minding their own damn business. Nobody's accusing Agnes, the midwife, of turning the milk sour because their cow got into some bad grass. Nobody's dunking poor Gertrude in a freezing river to see if she floats like some medieval episode of Survivor. The witch hunts, in all their paranoia-drenched, misogynistic glory, just never happen. And what does that world look like? Let's get into it, cranking this up to 11. First off, the most obvious winners are the so-called witches. That means women who dared to know stuff, like which herb actually helps with cramps, or how to deliver a baby without accidentally killing both mother and child. Without witch hunts turning knowledge into a death sentence, these women don't end up as human bonfires. They become healers, teachers, maybe even early scientists. The patriarchy takes a hit because, let's be real, a huge chunk of this witch-hunting nonsense was about keeping women scared and obedient. Without that fear hanging over their heads, women might have pushed back harder and earlier. Maybe the suffragettes show up a century or two ahead of schedule, wielding potions and pamphlets. And don't forget the economy. Witch hunts weren't just about religious hysteria, they were big business. Got a grudge against your neighbor? Call up the local witch finder and split the proceeds from her confiscated land. It was capitalism at its pettiest. Without that revenue stream, people might have been forced to find actual jobs instead of accusing each other of hexing goats. Whole towns could have skipped the bullshit and invested in infrastructure, trade, or, God forbid, education. Imagine Europe with fewer pyres and more schools. Revolutionary, right? Now let's talk about religion. Witch hunts were basically the church's version of a PR campaign. Look at us, fighting the devil one old lady at a time. Without that circus, maybe the church actually focuses on, being useful? Helping the poor? Preaching actual compassion? It's a long shot, but hey, we're in an alternate timeline here. Plus, if the church doesn't waste centuries demonizing folk traditions, Europe gets to keep a lot of its cool pagan rituals and herbal remedies. Instead of smashing pentagrams and burning books, we get a world where priests are more like chill community leaders who don't lose their minds over moonlit gatherings in the woods. But wait, it gets juicier. Without witch hunts, the Enlightenment might kick off earlier. Why? Because instead of scapegoating witches for every plague and famine, people are forced to ask real questions, like, hey, what's actually causing all this death and misery? Maybe someone invents the microscope a century ahead of schedule. Germ theory? Discovered in the 1500s instead of the 1800s. Imagine a Europe where science gets a head start because everyone stopped blaming magic and started looking at reality. We're talking antibiotics in the Renaissance, baby. Meanwhile, across the pond, things get really weird. The Salem witch trials? Never happen. The Puritans, already uptight as hell, don't get to channel their sexual repression and religious fervor into one big communal freakout. Maybe they actually build functional communities instead of imploding over paranoia. Without witch trials to distract them, colonial governments might focus on, say, not being awful to indigenous people. Again, long shot, but we're being optimistic. Or maybe they just invent capitalism faster and screw everything up in a new and exciting way. But don't think for a second that humanity escapes its love of scapegoating. If it's not witches, it's going to be something else. Maybe we get an earlier version of conspiracy theories. The milk's gone sour? Must be the French. Crops failed? Definitely a spy from the next village over. Humans are nothing if not creative when it comes to blaming others for their problems. So, while the absence of witch hunts might spare a lot of innocent women, it doesn't mean we stop being assholes. And then there's culture. Without witch hunts, the supernatural doesn't get demonized into oblivion. Folk traditions, herbal medicine, and old pagan practices stick around longer, blending into the mainstream. Maybe the line between science and mysticism gets blurrier, and instead of burning witches, we get early experimental labs run by badass women in cloaks. The occult becomes less satanic panic and more, let's figure out what's in this potion. Alchemy evolves into chemistry faster, and astrology doesn't get dunked on quite so hard. But here's the real kicker: fear. Witch hunts were all about controlling fear, of women, of the unknown, of change. Without them, society has to confront those fears head-on. Maybe we grow up faster as a species, learning to deal with uncertainty without setting people on fire. Or maybe we just find new ways to channel our anxieties. Who knows? Instead of witches, maybe we go after left-handed people, or folks who prefer pineapple on pizza. Humanity's great at inventing bullshit reasons to divide itself. And finally, let's address the elephant in the room: the legacy. In our timeline, witch hunts left a deep, ugly scar. They taught us how easy it is to turn on each other, how fear can override reason, and how dangerous it is to let power go unchecked. Without them, maybe we lose that lesson, or maybe we learn it in a less horrific way. Either way, the absence of witch hunts creates a world that's less paranoid, less brutal, and maybe, just maybe, a little more fun. So there you have it. No witch hunts, no pyres, no mass hysteria. Just a world that's slightly less shitty, where humanity gets to focus on actual progress instead of screaming at shadows. Is it perfect? Hell no. But it's a damn sight better than watching your neighbors roast over some made-up nonsense about frogs and cauldrons. And honestly, isn't that worth imagining? So, what's the takeaway? Without witch hunts, we have a world with fewer innocent people burned at the stake, more scientific progress, and maybe, just maybe, a bit more understanding between people. Sure, there's always the chance that humanity finds new scapegoats for its fears, but at least we didn't spend centuries setting fire to our best and brightest. In this alternate timeline, we're a little less paranoid, a little more curious, and, who knows, maybe the world's a little more fun. Thanks for joining me on What If History. Until next time, remember, history's a lot like a potion. It's up to us what we put in it.